into any of these ideas. And has everyone got a sheet?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the great sort of milestones of publications is there was a Spanish scholar at Cambridge called Juan Mascaro who produced an English translation in about 1963, expecting it to sell about 27 copies. And it sold, and it sold, and it sold, and they had to reprint it 3 times within the first 2 or 3 years. And it was a colossal seller. It's said now that Mascaro was, he was a Catalan, and his real name was Joan. So he changed it to Juan because of the confusion when he came to England. So he was a Cambridge scholar, and he produced this wonderful piece. And the rhythms of it, because the Bhagavad Gita is a rhythmical piece, so it's more like we would class it as a poem, but it's in sort of blank Sanskrit verse, and he translated it, getting across the whole feel, it is said now, it wasn't said at the time, of the St. James version of the Bible, which again is got a wonderful rhythm of its own. Mascaro was a great believer in the St. James version of the Bible, and he believed that the sound of something was very important, so he tried to get the sound as meaningful in English as it was going to be in Sanskrit. And it is considered to be a beautiful rhythmical piece of Sanskrit writing. Now let's just fill you in on a few things. Sanskrit is an ancient Indian language from that subcontinent. It's not used nowadays except by scholars, although, and it's always been rather like that. There are forms of Latin which are only ever used by scholars, and Greek is only used, classical Greek is only really used by scholars now. So we have that sort of concept in English. So it is a root language in the sense that it's the closest we've got to a peculiar thing called Indo-Aryan, or the root language that most of the European and the Asian languages can come from. No one speaks it extant now, but Indo-Aryan was actually, or Indo-European as it's now called, the Aryans got themselves into a tangle in the last war. Right across Europe and Asia, we find that all the languages which are extant, like Latin, Greek, Armenian, Hungarian, etc., have similar words in them. We can extrapolate from that they all came from a primary language called Indo-European that nobody speaks. And we can even postulate some of the words that came from that. We can find out. Largely these are farming terms, but they're also political terms, and they're also sort of familial terms. So that the root words for father and mother, etc., are very similar in most languages. So you'll see me tonight do a hocus pocus with words and jump from one language to another. This is legitimate philology. I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes. Where I am, I will say so. I do pull the wool over your eyes, but not so much in that. It's legitimate because languages flow into each other. They're not actually, there is no such thing as Spanish. You'll find that Spanish is different in the north of Spain. Like I've just said now, Juan Mascaro was a Catalan, so he didn't consider that he was a Spanish speaker. He considered he was Catalan, a different race in that sense, far more Latin-based language. And similarly, southern France, the Languedoc, with the place where they don't say we, they say hoc, which is Latin, hoc, this is, so instead of yes, they say hoc. So throughout Europe, we are tribal in that sense, still in our linguistic forms, and there are people, philologists, who would trace Northern English to quite different from Southern English, because we've got a great big Norse input, particularly down the Yorkshire side. If you consider that, then these languages would have changed slowly, and Indo-European would have drifted down into all these other languages, so that when you're learning a language, and my teacher, and one or two people here have the same teacher as me, Eugene Halliday, he said, whenever possible, if you climb up the subject, going further and further back to its roots, you find that it's easier and easier and easier to understand the concepts inside it. And with languages, if you want to understand with languages, look at the roots where they come from. So it's quite legitimate to move across languages like this and to see that certain sounds shift. And you can shift the sound from one language to another, and you'll find that there's a word there. It's quite legitimate. And the guys that formulated that, or the ones who put their name to it, are the brothers Grimm. The Grimm's law of sound shifts were that they were finding constantly that if you just slightly switch the way you say a word, then you've got the word in a different language. So that, you know, if you want to, I'm just trying to think of the word, estación in Spanish is a station. Estación, you can hear it, you know, and you can hear it in French as well. So the way we say things shifts the way it's formed. Ultimately, it'll change the way it's written, and that will get remarkably different in the course of 100 years. Apparently, language changes significantly every 20 years, and roughly every 20 miles. So that if you go from here to Manchester, they speak, you know, even just to, well, it'd be Warrington, wouldn't you? Be careful, you have a Warrington native here. The English they speak there is significantly different. The vowel sounds and the consonants are quite strange. And concepts change as well. And we can play about with these. I've just been listening to a talk I was giving in Manchester, and I asked them, do they have a back kitchen in Manchester? Because back kitchen is a strange concept. If you say a back kitchen down south, they won't understand what it is. You've got a kitchen? What's a back kitchen? I was brought up with a back kitchen, but we didn't have a kitchen, we just had a back kitchen. So I don't know what a front kitchen would look like. It's a northern concept, and I mean, it's a weird thing that we say. And its meaning is quite local.
That's kind of quite disappeared. I mean, that's brought back a memory for me, talking about the back kitchen.
Yeah.
Put it back, but we don't seem to say it anymore. Well, where I come from, we don't say it anymore, but there was a time when we did.
I suppose you can't have a makeover to a back kitchen, can you? You can't sell anybody units, you know, and melamine in a back kitchen. It just doesn't go, does it? No. Yeah, it's got to go a wooden table, it hasn't it? Yeah. Just one of those concepts that shifts about. And
it's Liverpool there, isn't it? Back kitchen.
Well, they have it in Manchester, and there was a person at the last talk I gave from somewhere way out in the sticks of Rawtenstall.
Oh.
They have them there as well.
Back kitchen, yeah.
So it's probably a tribal thing, you know.
Back kitchen and living room.
Yes.
Parlour.
Oh no,
where you
parlour was
parlay.
the front. No,
You parlay in the
parlour was the front.
Was,
In between
yes.
the back kitchen and the living room.
Oh, that was really posh.
It's interesting because you're all saying, just very slightly, you're putting the emphasis on kitchen, back kitchen, and I'm sure we would say it in the back kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the emphasis on the
Oh,
back
I see.
kitchen, where you're saying, well, I picked up that you were saying
Yeah.
back kitchen.
Right.
Well, only because we don't have a kitchen. If you had a kitchen and a back kitchen, you have to say back kitchen.
Yeah.
But when there isn't a kitchen anyway, you don't need to stress the back.
Well, no, he was
You
stressing
shouldn't
the
think so,
kitchen.
but yeah.
He's saying the opposite.
He said the back kitchen.
Yeah,
Mm.
because we,
That's
from
right.
Wirral, we emphasise kitchen, don't we?
Yeah. Mm.
So where does the back get emphasised?
We're getting very subtle now. It's actually to emphasis and.
It's architectural, really.
Yeah.
It's the way in which buildings, you see when you've got the terraced houses, you walked straight in from the street into what they called the parlour.
Yeah.
And you were if you had a larger house, you would have a living room behind that, and then a back kitchen. But you see, so it's architectural, really.
We were really posh because we had a vestibule.
Oh my goodness, you really were.
You know, it's just it.
Some people have a restroom, some have a toilet.
Yeah.
And some have a bog.
Right, but to get back to this, but I will, this just introducing it to people who are unfamiliar with this sort of shifting. It is quite legitimate philology to do this and to trace words in that way, and particularly with Sanskrit, because a lot of our English words come from Sanskrit and through European, through Latin and Greek, and through the German languages as well. So we can often find that we have familiarity with the meanings. I want to just start off with this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, because this has an impact. The Gita has a moving quality to it that seems to catch people and vibrate deeply in them. I mean, let me just Gandhi gets across this impact. Hinduism, as I know it, entirely satisfies my soul, fills my whole being. When doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and when I see not one ray of light on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me, and I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. My life has been full of tragedies, and if they have not left any visible and indelible effect on me, I owe it to the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so we're talking about this piece of work which is, it's said to be 4 times or 5 times as long as the Iliad. It's it comes from a poem called the Mahabharata, which is 5 times the size of the Iliad. The Bhagavad Gita is a tiny little section of that. So much so that scholars say now it doesn't necessarily form part of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a long story. One of the commentators on it says it's literally like a soap opera. It's to do with great egos. It's more like Dynasty, I think, than EastEnders. It's got these classic egos clashing against each other. They're all royals. It's about a family that splits and then starts to fight against itself. And the Gita is slotted into that. It's in a different type of language, and it's of a completely different movement to the rest of the story. The rest of the story we would be familiar with, the sort of King Arthur type thrashing about of royal houses trying to gain supremacy over each other. There's one big battle, it leads up to a great big battle where one side of the family and the other side of the family, they are literally 2 sides of the family. They share the same grandfather, and they're fighting for the kingship of one of the states in India. Into this battle suddenly is slotted this piece of very moving poetry, which is all about the nature of life, and very significantly, whether or not you should be active in life or whether you should retreat from life. And it's very important in terms of what we class now as yoga or meditation or withdrawal from the world. Because when it was written, the whole Mahabharata was written between sort of 500 BC to 200 AD, somewhere in that section, and probably it was known before that orally. That means it was written down about that time. You're slotting in this poem, which just discusses this aspect, which is very, very important in terms of Buddhism and in terms of Hinduism, whether you can live in this world and be holy, or live in this world and be reflective and meditative, or whether or not you have to withdraw. In other words, the monastic life. India's got a whole literature of particularly princes and political beings who would renounce the life of politics and withdraw from the world and literally go into a cave and meditate. And this, if you like, in a sense, was perhaps sort of, scholars have suggested it was written to counteract that and to actually describe a way of being involved in life that is meaningful and balanced and yet still contemplative. Okay? So it has a function in that sense as a poetic flow. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the poem. As I say, it's of a completely different order. They're all about getting and power, etc. And this thing slots in literally at a very significant climactic point. The battle is just about to begin. And one of the generals, Arjuna steps forward and calls his charioteer, who is another general called Krishna, and they ride down to between the two forces. So you've got one side of the family, the Pandavas, and the other side, the Kauravas, who are actually going to fight over this, and he's surrounded by his family, and he's a general, he's one of the great fighters in the army, and he's got to fight and kill. As he suggests, the only way he can win is by killing masses of his own family. And this is what the hopeful outcome of the day will be. And the whole thing just hits him. So we've got a guy who's going into a situation where he's going to have a nervous breakdown, if you like, in front of the battle. Luckily, his charioteer is Krishna. And Krishna has got a dual personality. He is a great general in his own right. He's given his army to the other side, to the Kauravas. Here's my 1,000 men. I'm going to stay on this side as an advisor to the Pandavas, because neither of you are right and I want to be balanced on both sides. Krishna also has this ability to become God immanent, to be literally, to bring God down and to speak for the God Vishnu, the sustainer. So we have a very strange situation. Before I get into that part, I just wanted to give you something. This is the passage, when I was saying before that the Gita actually grabbed me. I mean, I must have been about 14 or 15 when my dad gave me a copy of it. And it was the Mascara one he gave me. And so I managed to find the passage that really sort of set me buzzing. Okay? Arjuna and Krishna are discussing, and this is verse sort of 13, so it's really in the middle, it's flowing into the poem. And Arjuna's sort of asking him what life and death can mean in this situation. And Krishna responds to him, this body, Arjuna, is called the field. He who knows the field is called the knower of the field. Know that I am the knower in all the fields of my creation, and that the wisdom that sees the field and the knower of the field is true wisdom. Hear from me briefly what the field is and how it is, what its changes are, and whence each one comes. Who is the knower, and who is his power? Okay? That was the very passage that really got me going, and it got me because I'd been discussed with my father, one or two of the people, of what the nature of consciousness was, and that seemed to describe consciousness to me in a nutshell, but also to give it a background which was much vaster than any of our discussions had ever gone. Okay? So that was the part, literally, they talk about the hair on the back of your neck standing on it. That was the bit that actually moved me as literally, still a child really, I suppose, but aware already, that sometimes, there are things which really sort of hit home, and they move you quite significantly. So, as with Gandhi, I would say I've turned to the book quite a lot. I've got 3 copies, and a 4th one came today. So I do sort of look at different translations. We always get this stuff in translation, and translation is very important. None of them are the same. None of them have got that mascaro thing there that one has, where he's actually, the poetry itself has got a hit. It's the way you structure things. There's a poet called Hausman, and he says he doesn't know what poetry is, but when he hears it, the hair on the back of his neck stands on end. And he said, it's exactly as my dog doesn't know what a rabbit is, but if he gets a sniff of one. In other words, it's physical. Your body responds to something, or it doesn't, and that's fine. You either smell the rabbit or you don't, and if you do, you're off. And that so it is important, the translation, and I recommend the mascara one. I've just got another one, and I haven't read it yet, so I can't comment on that. The picture there you have are the Pandavas. They're the goodies, the good guys. We're on their side. Arjuna is one of them. And I just put this in because one of the ladies, one of those people on the end, the sixth one on the right, is their wife. The 5 brothers are all married to that one girl. It's a strange domestic situation, but it works for them, you know. I'm sure it's very happy and harmonious around the kitchen sink. Actually, they all had other wives as well, but they had that one wife in common. It's part of this sort of... Why I put that in is because we are talking about a very strange level of culture. Culture was still forming itself. The writings that we have, like the Old Testament and the Bible, are not written by one author. The Mahabharata is not written by one author. It's named as having one author, but it's apocryphal. We know that couldn't have happened. As with the Old Testament, they're gatherings of stories which are woven together and formulated into a book much later on, formulated into a form much later on. And for a long time they were oral. So the laws, the things we take for granted, like marriage, etc., the organization of cities, what we would class as being religion as opposed to social structure, were all blended together. There weren't laws in the same sense as customs. These people had customs in their particular location. Each tribe, each village would have its own little laws, which are quite different from others. You know? I remember when we used to play rugby, it was always called, you always had to remember that different referees had different rule books. It's called local rules. And you have to get used to it in the first half an hour of the game because you're not going to get away with the things you can get away in other situations. This is the structure of what's going on here. So I wanted to put that picture in just to remind you that we're talking at the very cradle of civilization, you know, before the birth of Christ, and lots of these things which we take for granted were very, very fluid there. Okay? Right. Now, I want to start with a very important concept which is not often mentioned in yoga books, but it's terribly important because it's one of the backlogs of all the others. It's a concept which is called Rta. And what I'm going to explain, I'm going to use, but that's a wonderful little woodcut by an artist called Albrecht Dürer, and it's of the Wheel of Fortune. Literally, these characters are on the wheel of life. They're going up and down with it, and they're caught. This is meant to be youth, going downwards here, with an animal's hat on, you know, and the bottom half of him is a donkey. Coming up on this side, his head has turned into a donkey, and his other half has become human. And like a sheep, this one here is wandering off into infinity. This is the hand of God. We're going to colour that one in. You can actually just about make out a hand. We wondered what it was, V and I. We looked at this for a long time before it actually came. They're the fingers, and that's the palm of the hand, and that's the thumb. And it's got a pointer here, or a rope, which is turning this wheel. So it's God, or it's angelic forces, which is turning this wheel of life, or wheel of fortune, is what it's actually called. And that's a concept which we're going to come right back to, because it's the essence of the one which is Rta. It's R-T-A, okay? Just let me read this part here. Just underneath where it says Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. Oh, Bhagavad means blessed one, and Gita means song of. So it's the song of the blessed one. That's what the name actually means. And Bhagavad is often taken to mean the blessed one, meaning the God man, or God himself. Rta. To join properly refers to that which is properly joined or ordered in proportional sequence, rule, or sometimes it's used as the word truth or law, as in the principle of natural order, regulating and coordinating the universe and every zone and thing inside it. It's described in the Rig Veda as harmony, and it's manifest in everything. But like the Tao, it's pervading all as the ground of all form. It is indistinguishable from within that all. It has resemblance to the Logos of Greek and of Christian philosophy. Okay, I need to unpick that just a little bit. Let me just describe this. I'll put it literally in lowercase because it's Sanskrit and they don't have capitals. And I just wanted to remind us of the fact that this is actually taken from from the Sanskrit language, and it's referring to the same thing. Some of you were here for my last talk on the Tao, and we talked about the fact that it was considered that there was a sequence, an order, which is the order of being behind the world. That the world seems to follow a structure which is inherent and moving through it, although not always present. So that now we've got glorious summer, but we can, if we willfully do it, remember the winter. So we know that the earth itself moves through a whole sequence of changes. And they quite intelligently said, well, where is the winter now we're in midsummer? Well, we know where it is tonight. But there is something which is holding a sequence which is not actually present in the world. So there is something which gives order to the world which isn't actually here now, present, tangible in the world, but will restate itself, sometimes and sometimes not. That order or sequence they call the Tao, or in this case, the Rukta. Now, because it's Sanskrit, we can say that it also has links in to other associations. Because it's a sequence and an order, we can also say it's probably to do with the word rota. And if you go from rotation, you're talking about the fact that what they also were talking about is the sequence of the heaven, the zodiacal belt, the fact that the year spins in that sense, and it's organized and ordered from this great infinite, perfect sphere which seems to govern the world. It governs it in terms of the tides and the sequences of the seasons, so it's probably the heavenly path, the sequence that guides everything else. You can look at that. Our teacher Eugene Halliday used to say, if you take that as the basic word, the root word, and then you play around with the sequence of these, most important things are these two consonants. The A on the end is literally the energy which animates it. So the art, you could then put, you've got the Torah, which is again the law, or the sequence in Hebrew scholarship. You've also got the Tarot, which is supposed to be talking about the same sequence and concealing it in pictograms, you know, and you've even got the Tao. You'd say the R is a very difficult form for the Chinese palette to form. So you've also got the Tao, which is a similar sort of description of the same thing. So coming from those, you'd actually say there is a hidden sequence or order in the world which seems to follow a rotationary process, but not quite. It's never exactly the same winter as we got last time, or exactly the same summer. No child is exactly the same as the parent, no offspring, etc. The seasons are very, very different from each other, and yet there is a similarity. So there's a sequence there which isn't fixed. It's habitual, but it isn't formalized to the nth degree that it's exactly the same. They talked about it being a spiral, they talked about it being energy which is pushing its way through a circular form, but they're talking about sequence in an ordered but not completely fixed way. Does that make sense? Okay. Remember the joint participation, you have to go like that. Otherwise I don't know whether to go round it again and bore you to death or to flow on. Okay? If you take with that, notice what we've been talking about, jumping from one language to another and looking at the root sounds. You know, this is the things. And if you took, you can actually sequence other processes in it and take it into similar forms in even more languages, but they're the ones which are immediately apparent and don't need any stretch, or too much of a stretch of the imagination. And the concept is here as well. I mean, this was drawn in the 15th century, so you've actually got this fixed in the European mind, and that's an idea which we're going to see is buried in Indian metaphysics. Okay? And it's also the big one that we're talking here. some basic background. We're talking here about the Rig Veda with this quote about that comes from the Rig Veda. Now, the Rig Veda was considered to be written about 15,000 years BC, edging it round to more to about 1,000 years BC. Now, we're talking about some of the oldest scriptures in the world. They would claim them to be the oldest, but I said this in the company of an Egyptologist, and they were, hang on, some of the oldest religious concepts in the world. And so you've got these being produced in India, so that they were taking ideas and religious forms very seriously. At the end of the Vedas, or if you like, the Vedas are hymns to God in its various forms. When they've been written over that period of about 500 or 600 years, we then start to find people, philosophers, discussing them in things called the Upanishads or the Vedanta. So you probably heard the word Vedanta. And Vedanta just means the end of the Vedas, or what came after the Vedas, and it's discussing the concepts that came up. Again, we're talking very ancient ideas here, and around this area you've got Jainism, Sikhism, you've got Buddhism, and similarly in Greece you've got all these ideas formulating in this 300 to 100 BC, sorry, 300 BC to 100 AD period of gestation, where these religious ideas seem to be being hammered out. Okay? So, from the Vedanta, we get this sort of concept. Part of the Vedanta and the Upanishads that came after it, there is a form of philosophy called Samkhya. The Bhagavad Gita seems to be giving us this basic philosophy, but putting it into a realizable framework. Okay? So there's just a little quote there from the Rig Veda, which is, "O Indra, lead us on the path of on the right path over all evils." Okay? And just to remind you that Hinduism in that sense is not a nuclear religion. It hasn't got a book like Christianity has, or Mohammedanism has. It isn't of a formed and fixed state. It has lots of books and lots of scriptures and lots of gods, and we have to remember that it grew by accretion. With many of the gods that we have, sorry, that the Europeans had, they were based firmly on what society needed. So a lot of, particularly in the planting cultures, the gods were based on the principal plant that was used for food. And we know this because if you look into all the Greek structures, they're named virtually after plants. You know, Bacchus was the god of grapes, Attis was the god of wheat. This is true in Egypt. Osiris was god of wheat. Well, we know that their forms were based on literally what the people in planting cultures, on what they ate. And in each local area and small village or small tribe, they would have probably a different plant, or if not a different plant, at least a different name for the plant and a different personality to it. As the cultures become more organized into larger villages and then into cities, they're combining these forms together, and they recognize the gods in each other. The Romans and the Greeks did this. When they conquered the country, they didn't change the religion. When they came to the Celtic lands, if you go down to Bath, they didn't change what was going on in the Bath there. It was a holy spring. Holy Spring, we've got a god for Holy Springs. Our god of Holy Springs is the same as your god for Holy Springs. Let's just have both names, and then the Romans can come here, and the Brits can come. No problem. They did this because they recognized, they came here, they said, well, your Cahulan is exactly the same as our Hercules. What's the difference? So they didn't change. I mean, the Christians tended to hammer people, and you must be a Christian. They didn't. As long as the money was coming in, the Romans and the Greeks didn't mind. You know, believe what you like, lads. It's very similar to ours. It's probably just a mythology anyway. We can tolerate this. We can understand it. So as these gods get more and more involved, then you finish up with hundreds and hundreds of different gods. And there's the Greek pantheon is filled with lots of little gods as well, who all have different qualities and different areas. You know, same in Egypt and same in India. So it looks like they've got lots and lots of gods, but actually there's concepts that are pretty well basic. You've got a creator, to wind her up at. And this forms pretty much the basis of all religious forms.
Can I butt in there?
Go on.
I spent an evening in an ashram in India, talking to the secretary, which was the name of the person running it, and he insisted that Hinduism was monotheistic.
Uh-huh.
I said, no, maybe you don't know what monotheistic means. I said, no, I know what monotheistic means. God is so complex that when we've got a particular need to speak to him or to praise him, we address an aspect of him.
Yes.
But there can only be one God.
Mm-hmm.
And all these others are manifestations of God. I was utterly surprised to hear that in Hinduism.
Yeah.
No more than that, just to say.
So they've got quite a sophisticated concept of
They would say, well, you've got a Trinity, and
Yeah.
you've got the Son of God, and you've got the Holy Spirit. But
Mhm.
we see many more aspects of God than you see, and we make each of them into a sort of divinity, but they are not the one single God.
You've got sort of this wonderful anomaly that because the Mediterranean countries were basically matriarchal in the way that they worshipped, they invented the Virgin Mary, who was the fourth member of that Trinity. In practice, more prayers are...
I would disagree with that.
Well,
That's a big diversion. Yeah.
But you can see what's happened, can't you? That there was a need for a
A
particular...
woman essence.
Yes.
Yes.
And that this has to be recognised as part of God. And so it comes out of the people, if you like. It isn't there in the formal scripture, but it becomes out and it becomes there in the practice which is organised inside. We create our gods in that sense according to the needs which we have and which we generate. But beyond that, we could say there is a great life, there is a Tao, there is a Rurta, which is behind all that, which is forming it. It's fascinating in Hinduism because this root word, Rurta, breaks into two that we do know. Probably we know if we've done any meditation at all. It comes into Dharma and Karma. Let me just mention that R is very important because without the R there it's Kama, which is, as we probably all read the Kama Sutra, or at least done the colouring book. Karma means desire and it's cupidity. So their god Kama is exactly the same as Cupid. Again, jumping from god to god, the Romans would have gone there and said, okay, Kama, we understand him, he's got a bow and arrow, same. Very much, it's understandable. So Kama Sutra is about desire. Karma is a different concept whatsoever, and it comes out of the root word here. Jumping again from language to language again, sutra. From the same root as a suture, as you use in a operation when a surgeon stitches something up, he does it with a suture. It's a thread. It's a philosophical thread. A philosophical thread means there's no narrative here. A sutra is what you need to know to do the stuff, to literally bind yourself back to this subject. And there are sutras in all different forms. Patanjali's sutras and the Buddhist sutras are all to do with threads. Very pithy string of concepts, linear, taking you from where you are now to where you need to be. So a sutra has again the same root, it's a thread. And that thread will bind you into a situation. So again, the root form leaps from language to language, but the concepts are still there.
Just an interesting fact, the words on the left-hand side, you know, as in it's talking about cycles and revolutions. The Welsh for to turn is Troy, and also there's Troy and Tro. Tro is a turn, as in a noun, and Troy is the verb to turn, which again use the same letters.
So my teacher would say, look at the consonants, remember that the vowels are to do with the energy that you're putting into a situation, so the vowels are very, very flexible.
Yeah.
But the consonants are the key to it. And in languages like Hebrew and Arabic, you've only got the consonants, they only have one vowel. They say lots of different vowels, but they only write one, which is Aleph. So you can write you can form all most of those words from the root, from the consonants that you've actually got in them. And it's the same with the sutra. Most of the letters are there in both forms, and so you can literally lean from them. Now Eugene would say, if you learned these roots, you can get your way through French, Italian, certainly all the Romance languages, and English, and probably into German as well, because you're getting what he said you used to have to do. Languages break like families, and they have descendants, and they have descendants, and they have descendants. It's getting complicated, more and more complex, less and less, more and more refinement, learning more and more about less and less. Climb back up the roots, find out where the tree is, there's the stem, and you get a great deal more information. You get a lot more for your information, so you don't have to hold as many concepts. You're getting more governing concepts which control all the smaller ones. And particularly with language, he said, you can then, if someone gives you a word, and you've got a smattering of Latin and Greek or Sanskrit, then you can pretty well analyse what they're talking about in some way. I was never that good, but certainly one or two of his students did take that very seriously on board. Okay, and they were very successful in their linguistic analysis. I mean, so we got sutra from that. We've also got a word which is going to come up in this thing while we're talking about it, which is yoga. Yoga is here used in the Bhagavad Gita as the word discipline. It's a way of behaving, it's a practice. It's not just bending yourself around, that's one of them, but essentially it's a practice for rediscovering God. In other words, it's the root word in Sanskrit is yuj. We now pronounce it. The J is a very, very late comer into the alphabet. It's usually related to the word in English, which is yoke, which again fastens two things together. The K and the G are both glottal stops. K is the same as G. They're glottal stops. You can hear me hitting my glottis with a K or a G. They're called glottal stops. So the Brothers Grimm would say they can be the same letter. You slide from one. If you haven't got time to say a G, you'll put a K in there anyway. It's like T and D. You slide from one into the other. The Y is similarly I, J, and Y are all the same letter. You can use them indiscriminately. And if you interchange all of those, you've got most of the words for yes in Indo-European languages. Okay? So if you say they're all the same, then you've also got the word joke, which Arthur Koestler says is a very, very witty way of joining two things together which don't also belong. So you're going along and you think, this is a High Court judge, he's got a wig on, he's got the full kit, he looks very grand, he's marvellous. You link it with something ridiculous, he slips on a banana skin, falls head over heels down the stairs, it's funny. You're linking two things, you're tying two things together which are out of sequence. And that immediately releases you from the situation. So a joke and a yoke and yoga are linking things. Okay? Right, to come back to this process here, we're going to be talking about yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's talking about three basic forms for understanding and getting yourself back into an understanding of what God is. Okay? In the Upanishads, I'm just getting to the bottom of page 1, in the Upanishads, or ultimate reality, separates into Dharma and Karma. These are the individual responsibility or duty, Dharma. So the Dharmakaya is the duty of a Buddhist. The Dharmakaya is literally your duties as a Buddhist, what you should, what actually, the sequence of events which will happen for you, balancing and harmonizing its natural view. Our individual Dharma is therefore what we must do in life to harmonize and rebalance the karma or universal order that we have disrupted by unbalanced, displaced, or negative action. Okay, so because our actions in the world have unbalanced ourselves, we're not flowing with the Tao or with the Rutta, we're not flowing with the actual sequence and rotation of the world, we have to rebalance ourselves. And that rebalancing is done by Dharma. It's our duty to rebalance ourselves, to help the world flow. that make sense? Okay. So those two words of Dharma and Karma you'll come across all the time, but they're both buried in this word Rutta, the actual sequence, and they come from the same concept of needing to rebalance or to put yourself back in the flow. Brahman is the universal spirit, and Atman is the individual self. Differing opinions exist among scholars regarding the etymology of these words. Brahman probably comes from the root Brut, which means the biggest, the greatest, the all. Brahman is the infinite spirit source and the fabric and core and destiny of all existence, both as manifested and unmanifested, and the formless infinite substratum, and from which the universe has grown. Sorry, there's a witch missing out there. Brahman is the ultimate, both transcendent and immanent, the absolute, infinite existence, the sum total of all that ever is, was, or shall be. The word Atman means the immortal, perfect spirit of any living creature, being, including trees, etc., and even rocks. The idea put forward by the Upanishadic seers that Atman and Brahman are one and the same is perhaps one of the great contributions made by Indian philosophy to the thought of the world. Now, the Atman is what we would call the soul. It's not just self, it's the soul. Now, in Christianity, your soul is like your personality. Your personality in Indian metaphysics is not your soul. Your personality is your upbringing, what's been stamped into you, the way you've reacted. You've built a personality, but you are fundamentally, your spirit is an Atman. Because when you die, it will move on and it will live again, and it will have another personality in another situation. In their concept, this wheel of life to them is actually a sequence. They call it samsara. It's a world of life. We've all been here before, we will all be here again. We are life progressing through, evolving through the universe. Now, this is a concept which is hard to swallow when you first come across it, but it's necessary if you're going to talk in terms of life as being non-individualized, non-fixed and formalized, flowing through everything in the universe. And we, as part of that, have an individual life which is flowing with it, rolling from situation to situation, within which we will create personalities depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. So our personality is not in any way fixed or rigid. It becomes formed in us, but it's a response of our energy to the situations that we find ourselves in. Okay? So they have this other layer of concept. The Brahman is the all, the everything, which everything is made out of, but which is indiscriminate. It's vast, the vast ocean of being. Within that you have your particular individual being, the Atman, which is it is separate from Brahman, but part of it. It's the Brahman in small, if you like, inside you. Within that you've developed a personality because of your upbringing, your parents, the situations you've been in, your education, etc. Okay, so now we come to the Gita specifically, and as I said, it comes from a book, it comes from a battle sequence where Arjuna, and those of us who are of a yogic bent will notice that his name, Arjuna, is very, very similar to a very important chakra which is here, between the eyeballs. In Sanskrit, that's Ajna. And that means actively knowing. And that Jna in Sanskrit is knowledge. Our teacher used to say to us, okay, that JN is the same Ny that we have in the word Kn for knowledge. If you say the letters Kn and Jna, it takes you immediately to this point here. Ny. Okay? You can do this. It's part of the mantra yoga. You say the letters and you go Ny. Ny. And in knowledge is to do with that statement of here. It's a being, a knowledge is a form which is residing in the Ajna center inside the being. It's what we would call the visual sense. And that Ajna point is buried in this word Arjuna. The other thing which is I only found out today while I was looking at the roots of it is the root of the word argentium. Any Latin scholars here?
Silver.
Silver, yeah, from Argentina, it comes from the same thing. That's where they found silver. Arjuna is the silver, white, light-headed god. Okay? So he's a god man, a general in this particular case, but the root word is considered to be the same as argentium, which came from the Greek, which is to be silver. Again, pushing on one language into another just to show that they do link across, and that we were at one time one vast tribe of people who all speak a similar language, or similarly in its roots. Okay? Well, there's a lovely picture for you. So Arjuna asks his charioteer, in this particular case Krishna, who has loaned himself to this army as an advisor, to drive him out between the two armies. Here they are going out. One of the things that fascinated me when I first saw, you remember the Krishna consciousness people, who do organise a great number of these paintings. The first one I saw, there were 5 horses on the chariot, and they were the 5 senses. So you've then got a wonderful metaphor here of what is going out between the battle here is the body. The body has got 5 senses, and the 5 senses are taking you into the world. Okay? Seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting. Takes you into the world. They're the gateways that the information from the world comes into you. Inside of you, you've got the God-man, who is driving the chariot, and you've got the witnesser, the knower, Arjuna, actually there, who is confused and frightened constantly by what the world offers him. To the Hindus, the world was a veil of literally subtle suffering. It was not a heaven on earth. It was a place where we are constantly let down, where the world will grind us down. It is that sequence of the world machine on which we are trapped, raised and lowered. We will become high, we will go back down low again. There's lots of stories. There's one where one king was being particularly cruel to his people, so the yogi goes to him and says, like, why are you being so cruel? You know, they are poor people, and yes, you've got to keep them in order, but you don't have to crucify them and chop their heads off too often. And he says, well, I'm a king, I can do what I like. The yogi comes out and says, come on, there's a big anthill over here. He looks at it and says, you know, every one of those ants has been a king like you. Behave yourself. You're only here to temporary position. It's a temporary position. The circle will go round and you will be at the bottom. Look after the ones on the bottom. You will be there again. You're up at the top now. You will be down at the bottom. The whole sequence is turned inside out. You know, go back to your place. Do the job properly. But don't get above yourself. Don't get caught on it. It's a wheel. You might be at 12 o'clock now, but it does go down to 6. And you'll be on it. Again and again. Unless you can get off it by withdrawing from the world. Okay? So the big process is here. Even the princes, Gautama Buddha was a prince. He left home, renounced the world, left his wife and his children. He had to find out whether or not there was any more to life than what he had, literally. So this whole idea of renouncing the world to try and get off this cycle of rebirths and pain and in this world was one which was very, very current at this time. Okay. Nice little quote here. Would anyone like to read the quote? You must be getting fed up with my voice at the moment. John, please.
Books are like rainbows, to be thankfully received in their first impression. My friend and I, owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spake to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent. The voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us.
Okay, that was Ralph Waldo Emerson writing about, as you can see from the way he spelled, one of the sort of first translation. Apparently it was translated into English in 1765, I think. got it written down somewhere, which surprised me. 1785. So a lot of, I mean, this whole concept of root language, etc., grew up out of officers in the Indian Army and in the Indian administration, several famous British ones, who noticed from the classical, they were trained in Latin and Greek, going out there, that Sanskrit was very, very similar in its consonants, and recognizing that here we had something which was pre-Christian, pre-Greek in civilization, and a culture which had its roots right back. And the weird thing about India was that they could see that you had a kingdom here which was run by a Buddhist king, where there was complete ahimsa, nobody was executed, the whole system was run on extreme kindness and gentleness. And next to it there would be a kingdom where people were executed, even the king was executed if the crops failed, where human sacrifice was quite common. And there were rules in India which we have to recognize were only extinguished very late on in history. The concept of sati, where a wife was literally buried alive with her dead husband, continued until about 1880. And
There have been reports of it happening recently as well.
yeah.
Or burnt alive.
Yes.
Right, yes.
So we have to bear this in mind, along with these high concepts of religious thought. We also have alongside it some of these very, very ancient rites and rituals. Now we know that our religions are based in this. You know, the whole concept of the communion is take this my body and my blood. Originally, that would have been a human sacrifice, or then an animal sacrifice, and right the way through. In Egypt, it's considered that it just hovered between the two. And we only have to go to somewhere like South America to see that they would regularly sacrifice 4,000 human souls. What they were concerned with was the fact that they could see that this wheel turned. And the society is doing very well at the moment, very successful, but it will turn. We will fall, Rome will fall, you know, constantly these things will fall. Is there anything we can possibly do to keep ourselves up, to keep the positive aspect up? Well, if the wheel turns and lots of things need to die, obviously nature kills as often as it gives birth. So if we kill, we might be staving off. There seems to be, if you like, a strange algebra about this formulation. If we give it so much death, perhaps we will be spared, or perhaps our culture or our empire, our civilization will be spared. And this was it. The sun needs this. It's going to die otherwise if we don't. So it's a hideous concept in its rawest state, but it's still buried, and you can still see it in the rituals of most religions behind that, this sacrifice to stave off this cyclic law which seems to enmesh us all. In Sanskrit it's samsara, by the way. There's a perfume named samsara. I saw this in the chemist the other day, and I thought to myself, strange concept for perfume. Interesting idea. The Gita is next bit. The Gita is a self-contained poem or song in Sanskrit from circa 400 BC. 18 chapters or 700 verses long. It's part of the Mahabharata. 1.8 million words in the Mahabharata, so it's a long book. But it is readily considered to be able to stand alone, so much so that it has been thought to have been added later, or perhaps written separately. You've got these big clash of egos in the Mahabharata, and suddenly in the middle of this battle scene, instead of glorying in the death and the success and the victory, Arjuna suddenly breaks down in his chariot. He says, I can't go on. I'm facing my uncles and my cousins and some of these people I went to school with. Even if I win, I'm going to be up to my neck in the blood of the people who I was brought up with. How could I possibly ever do this? So it's a big question, it's a great, great metaphor. A lot of people reject the whole, this is the first chapter virtually, about this, and they sort of say, well, hang on, Krishna is going to talk him into going back into the battle. God is going to say to him, no, get back in. This is your duty. Where you are now is exactly where you should be. This is the battle that you have to face. Now, whether it's metaphorical is your choice. The wonderful thing at the end of the Gita, when God has shown Arjuna the way that he would respond and the way he recommends Arjuna, he's saying, but it's your decision. You choose how you react. It's your being that you're talking about. What are you going to do? He doesn't tell him and they say do it. He's saying this is what I feel you should do, and this is what you would do if you were me as God. But then I am vast. You know, he even shows him in chapter 11. Arjuna says to him, you know, what are you really like? And Krishna actually just explodes into life in all its various forms: death, destruction, birth, the whole mass. And Arjuna sort of backs away. It's like Job, you know, when he asks God, how strong are you? He just steps back and goes, wow. And so Krishna then says, if you were me, you would get back into your body, get into the chariot, and do what you're here to do. You're a kshatriya, you're a warrior. You've trained to fight for the good, for right. What else can you do? Even if you don't kill these people, I would.
Do we know whether Arjuna was aware that Vishnu would eventually speak through the chariot? Was he just proclaiming aloud, isn't it a terrible situation I am in? Or was he addressing another human being?
No, he's addressing another human being.
He doesn't realise that Vishnu is going to speak through this new person, does he?
Well, you've got this strange sort of dual nature to Krishna. Krishna is a weird character because he appears in so many stories. Remember, there's not one book of Krishna. He's a local god, so sometimes he's an extremely sexy character that charms the local maidens, and sometimes he is acting as a general in a war, and sometimes he's doing other things. So he's God in every place, if you like. God in every
Well,
man.
people are aware of his divine nature when they meet
They
him.
are. They are.
Okay.
The spirit of any living creature, being, including trees, etc., and even rocks. The idea put forward by the Upanishadic seers that Atman and Brahman are one and the same is perhaps one of the great contributions made by Indian philosophy to the thought of the world. Now, the Atman is what we would call the soul. It's not just self, it's the soul. Now, in Christianity, your soul is like your personality. Your personality in Indian metaphysics is not your soul. Your personality is your upbringing, what's been stamped into you, the way you've reacted. You've built a personality, but you are fundamentally, your spirit is an Atman. Because when you die, it will move on and it will live again, and it will have another personality in another situation. In their concept, this wheel of life to them is actually a sequence. They call it samsara. It's a world of life. We've all been here before. We will all be here again. We are life progressing through, evolving through the universe. Now, this is a concept which is hard to swallow when you first come across it, but it's necessary if you're going to talk in terms of life as being non-individualized, non-fixed and formalized, flowing through everything in the universe. And we, as part of that, have an individual life which is flowing with it, rolling from situation to situation, within which we will create personalities depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. So our personality is not in any way fixed or rigid. It becomes formed in us, but it's a response of our energy to the situations that we find ourselves in. Okay? So they have this other layer of concepts. The Brahman is the all, the everything, which everything is made out of, but which is indiscriminate. It's vast, the vast ocean of being. Within that you have your particular individual being, the Atman, which is it is separate from Brahman, but part of it. It's the Brahmana in small, if you like, inside you. Within that you've developed a personality because of your upbringing, your parents, the situations you've been in, your education, etc. Okay, so now we come to the Gita specifically, and as I said, it comes from a book, it comes from a battle sequence, where Arjuna, and those of us who are of a yogic bent will notice that his name, Arjuna, is very, very similar to a very important chakra which is here, between the eyeballs. In Sanskrit, that's Ajna. And that means actively knowing. And that jna in Sanskrit is knowledge. Our teacher used to say to us, okay, that JN is the same ny that we have in the word kn, for knowledge. If you say the letters kn and jna, it takes you immediately to this point here. Ny. Okay? You can do this. It's part of the mantra yoga. You say the letters and you go ny, ny. And in knowledge is to do with that statement of here. It's a being, and knowledge is a form which is residing in the ajna center inside the being. It's the what we would call the visual sense. And that ajna point is buried in this word Arjuna. The other thing which is I only found out today while I was looking at the roots of it is the root of the word Argentium. Any Latin scholars here? Silver, yeah, from Argentina. It comes from the same thing. That's where they found silver. Arjuna is the silver, white, light-headed god. Okay? So he's a god man, a general in this particular case, but the root word is considered to be the same as Argentium, which came from the Greek, which is to be silver. Again, pushing one language into another just to show that they do link across, and that we were at one time one vast tribe of people who all speak a similar language, or similarly in its roots. Okay? Well, there's a lovely picture for you. So Arjuna asks his charioteer, in this particular case Krishna, who has loaned himself to this army as an advisor, to drive him out between the two armies. Here they are going out. One of the things that fascinated me when I first saw, you remember the Krishna consciousness people, which do organise a great number of these paintings. The first one I saw, there were 5 horses on the chariot, and they were the 5 senses. So you've then got a wonderful metaphor here of what is going out between the battle here is the body. The body has got 5 senses, and the 5 senses are taking you into the world. Okay? Seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting. Takes you into the world. They're the gateways that the information from the world comes into you. Inside of you, you've got the God-man, who is driving the chariot, and you've got the witnesser, the knower, Arjuna, actually there, who is confused and frightened constantly by what the world offers him. To the Hindus, the world was a veil of literally subtle suffering. It was not a heaven on earth. It was a place where we are constantly let down, where the world will grind us down. It is that sequence of the world machine on which we are trapped. Raised and lowered. We will become high, we will go back down low again. There's lots of stories. There's one wonderful one where one king was being particularly cruel to his people. So the yogi goes to him and says, like, why are you being so cruel? You know, they are poor people, and yes, you've got to keep them in order, but you don't have to crucify them and chop their heads off too often. And he says, well, I'm a king, I can do what I like. The yogi comes out and says, come on, there's a big anthill over here. He looks at it and he says, you know, every one of those ants has been a king like you. Behave yourself. You're only here to temporary position. It's a temporary position. The circle will go round and you will be at the bottom. Look after the ones on the bottom. You will be there again. You're up at the top now. You will be down at the bottom. The whole sequence is turned inside out. You know, go back to your place. Do the job properly, but don't get above yourself. Don't get caught on it. It's a wheel. You might be at 12 o'clock now, but it does go down to 6, and you'll be on it again and again, unless you can get off it by withdrawing from the world. Okay? So the big process is here. Even the princes, Gautama Buddha was a prince. He left home, renounced the world, left his wife and his children. He had to find out whether or not there was anything more to life than what he had, literally. So this whole idea of renouncing the world to try and get off this cycle of rebirths and pain and in this world was one which was very, very current at this time. Okay. Nice little quote here. Would anyone like to read the quote? You must be getting fed up with my voice at the moment. John, please.
Books are like rainbows, to be thankfully received in their first impression. My friend and I, owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spake to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent. The voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered, and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us.
Okay, that was Ralph Waldo Emerson writing about, as you can see from the way he spelled, one of the sort of first translations. Apparently it was translated into English in 1765, I think. I've got it written down somewhere, which surprised me. 1785. So a lot of, I mean, this whole concept of root language, etc., grew up out of officers in the Indian Army and in the Indian administration, several famous British ones, who noticed from their classical, they were trained in Latin and Greek, going out there that Sanskrit was very, very similar in its consonants, and recognizing that here we had something which was pre-Christian, pre-Greek in civilization, and a culture which had its roots right back. And the weird thing about India was that they could see that you had a kingdom here which was run by a Buddhist king, where there was complete ahimsa, nobody was executed, the whole system was run on extreme kindness and gentleness, and next to it there would be a kingdom where people were executed, even the king was executed if the crops failed, where human sacrifice was quite common. And there were rules in India which we have to recognize were only extinguished very late on in history. The concept of sati, where a wife was literally buried alive with her dead husband, continued until about 1880. And
There have been reports of it happening recently, though.
yeah.
Or burnt alive.
Yes.
Right, yes.
So we have to bear this in mind, along with these high concepts of religious thought. We also have alongside it some of these very, very ancient rites and rituals. Now we know that our religions are based in this. You know, the whole concept of the communion is take this my body or my blood. Originally, that would have been a human sacrifice, or then an animal sacrifice, and right the way through. In Egypt, it's considered that it just hovered between the two. And we only have to go to somewhere like South America to see that they would regularly sacrifice 4,000 human souls. What they were concerned with was the fact that they could see that this wheel turned, and the society's doing very well at the moment, very successful, but it will turn. We will fall, Rome will fall, you know, constantly these things will fall. Is there anything we can possibly do to keep ourselves up, to keep the positive aspect up? Well, if the wheel turns and lots of things need to die, obviously nature kills as often as it gives birth. So if we kill, we might be staving off. There seems to be, if you like, a strange algebra about this formulation. If we give it so much death, perhaps we will be spared, or perhaps our culture or our empire, our civilization will be spared. And this was it. The sun needs this. It's going to die otherwise if we don't. So it's a hideous concept in its rawest state, but it's still buried, and you can still see it in the rituals of most religions behind that, this sacrifice to stave off this cyclic law which seems to enmesh us all. In in Sanskrit it's samsara, by the way. There's a perfume named samsara, by the way. I saw this in the chemist the other day, and I thought to myself, strange concept for perfume. Interesting idea. The Gita is next bit. The Gita is a self-contained poem or song in Sanskrit from circa 400 BC. 18 chapters or 700 verses long. It's part of the Mahabharata. 1.8 million words in the Mahabharata, so it's a long book, but it is readily considered to be able to stand alone, so much so that it has been thought to have been added later, or perhaps written separately. You've got these big clash of egos in the Mahabharata, and suddenly in the middle of this battle scene, instead of glorying in the death and the success and the victory, Arjuna suddenly breaks down in his chariot. He says, I can't go on. I'm facing my uncles and my cousins and some of these people I went to school with. Even if I win, I'm going to be up to my neck in the blood of the people who I was brought up with. How can I possibly ever do this? So it's a big question, it's a great metaphor. A lot of people reject the whole, this is the first chapter virtually, about this, and they sort of say, well, hang on, Krishna's going to talk him into going back into the battle. God is going to say to him, no, get back in. This is your duty. Where you are now is exactly where you should be. This is the battle that you have to face. Now, whether it's metaphorical is your choice. The wonderful thing at the end of the Gita, when God has shown Arjuna the way that he would respond and the way he recommends Arjuna, he's saying, but it's your decision. You choose how you react. It's your being that you're talking about. What are you going to do? He doesn't tell him and they say, do it. He's saying, this is what I feel you should do. And this is what you would do if you were me, as God. But then I am vast. You know, he even shows him in chapter 11, Arjuna says to him, you know, what are you really like? And Krishna actually just explodes into life in all its various forms, death, destruction, birth, the whole mass. And Arjuna sort of backs away. It's like Job, you know, and he asks God, how strong are you? He just steps back and goes, wow. And so Krishna then says, if you were me, you would get back into your body, get into the chariot, and do what you're here to do. You're a kshatriya, you're a warrior. You've trained to fight for the good, the right. What else can you do? Even if you don't kill these people, I will.
Do we know whether Arjuna was aware that Vishnu would eventually speak through the chariot? Was he just proclaiming aloud, isn't it a terrible situation I am in? Or was he addressing another human being?
No, he's addressing another human being.
He doesn't realise that Vishnu is going to speak through this new person, does he?
Well, you've got this strange sort of dual nature to Krishna. Krishna is a weird character because he appears in so many stories. Remember, there's not one book of Krishna. He's a local god, so sometimes he's an extremely sexy character that charms the local maidens, and sometimes he is acting as a general in a war, and sometimes he's doing other things. So he's God in every place, if you like. God in every
But are
man.
people aware of his divine nature when they meet
They
him?
are.
Okay.
From this. Now, if we stay in that state as we do as a child, we don't formulate at all. Once we start to formulate, we are given a name. Now, as Eugene says, for sentimental reasons, I'm going to call that Alan. Okay? Now that name is then used to create psychologically a form, an ego, so that everything will be seen through that. Alan fills his nappy. Alan doesn't scribble on the walls. No, doesn't do that. Alan does this, Alan does that. So all sorts of concepts are linked into this particular idea of who I am. Now, for a long time, I didn't call myself Alan, and you didn't call yourself Judith, you know, or Pam, or whatever. But at a certain point, you start talking about yourself in the third person. So I would start saying, Alan doesn't want to eat that. Alan wants his toy. this concept eventually becomes internalized and I become Alan. I've then got an ego, and it can win or lose, it can go up, it can go down, and it's dependent, as we said with the dot on the head, on other people describing what Alan is. Now, this was the whole being. I've skewed it over to one side and I've said this is terribly important and that's me. And I've also, because my parents were very good at psychologically forming me, there's a whole lot of things here which are not allowed in. And I've got to keep them out. You know? Now that creates heaven and hell. I've now got a personality which responds well as long as I stay in there. If I vary out here, oh my God, look what I'm doing now, back inside. Mustn't do that. Oh dear, you know, stay in here. I've got the safe zone, I've got the unsafe zone, and this is still inside of me. That's all inside my psychology. So Jung would then say you've got here a subconscious where you have looked when mum and dad weren't actually there. And then you've got an unconscious, and that melds outwards into everybody else's unconscious. So this person's unconscious, and mine might interact because they've got a subconscious here, and they've got a completely different ego, which their parents have constructed for them over here. How can they possibly relate? Well, this thing has to believe in itself, and that thing has to believe in itself. So there are formal relationships between them, but actually they're connected unconsciously, and the field knows both of them. Now that field is Brahman. Oh, sorry. This is Atman. That's the personality, or Ahamkara. Sorry. I can write much neater than this. I believe. Ahamkara, or the ego, which has been completely created by other people. Other people's input has told you who you are. So you must be very careful about believing it. You know? The other thing Eugene used to say, if you read Machiavelli, the thing you say is, che bono. It's Italian and it means, who benefits? Machiavelli said, when you hear anything at all, including things inside yourself, you say, who benefits if I believe this crap? I mean, who benefits if I believe this idea? If I believe what I'm hearing, who benefits? That will tell you who put it in. And you say it in society too. Who benefits if I believe Muhammad's brightness? That margarine tastes like butter.
This is a bicycle cause as well.
Pardon? Yeah, absolutely. But particularly to what's going on inside your head. Because the people who formulated you and indoctrinated you may not have had your best interests at heart. They may have just been trying to control you and have a quiet life. Which is okay. You know, it's not a wrong thing to do that. Because kids can be a pain in the neck. But, as a human being, with one of those things inside you, if you want to get back to this thing, and then ultimately back to that thing, you've got to get through that process there, and you've got to not let it get in the way too soon. Who benefits if I listen to this? Who benefits if I believe what I hear?
Can you say anything about Alan's intentions and will, what he wants to achieve,
Right.
and his direction in life?
Mm-hmm.
And not just his direction, but his willingness to subjugate himself to what he thinks he perceives as a greater common good.
Right. Well, what you can see immediately is that the one that Alan thinks he has, the emphasis which has been put in is not the same as the big one, probably.
Yes.
So there was, if you like, an
But
eternal
he,
thought.
at some stage he becomes a reasoning individual and can begin to make his own judgments and say, I don't believe in the tooth fairy,
Yes.
and similar things. At some stage, it seems to me he's got to be responsible for his own direction and his own decisions.
Right.
I wouldn't say necessarily.
I wouldn't say necessarily.
Right,
it's
so
a-
okay,
how,
we
how,
might discuss
how
that,
big
right?
that wall, that initial wall is. This one, sorry.
No, I don't mean he gets it right.
No.
I mean he's got to believe he's in the driving seat and look round for knowledge that helps him to make the right decisions.
Not all people
Right.
do.
No.
What you're going to get bamboozled, in other words, unless you apply that, in which case most of your thoughts you'll find are not honest and truthful. They've been put in by people, first of all, who wanted to control you, society. So you haven't been given a fair crack at this, crack at the whip, you know? So what you then have to say is, to deal with them is a lifetime's work. Most psychiatrists take about 4 or 5 years, psychoanalysts, to work on people. And you know, at £150 a pop, that's quite
That's good,
expensive.
yes.
Okay?
There's a benefit.
You get a great big book. Right? Now, so the process is, so there are hundreds of people making a fortune out of dealing with that for people. Because some people actually know that they've been badly wired.
Yeah.
Now, there is this one, which is your perfect part, that fits into the great cog of the great wheels. When the universe turns, it creates thousands and thousands of little turns. You are one of those thousands of little turns. Inside one of those little turns is what, this is Ezekiel's wheels within wheels. You're one of those. There is a perfect place for you in this world. You haven't seen it yet. Now, the way to find it is not to deal with these and say, oh my God, my mother really screwed me out. What it is to do is to say, look what's underneath all this drawing and supporting it, pure being. So yoga's method is, don't learn anything, don't go to a psychiatrist, don't take those lines seriously. All of them are crap. Don't think. Stop thinking, because thinking is a process which will go round and round endlessly. Because this idea depends on that idea, which depends on that idea, which depends on that idea. So if you try to unravel it, we were talking about Alexander the Great. Gordian knot. There's a knot tied round a chariot, again chariot. The horses have gone, the chariot's there. There's an enormous knot round it. The Persians said to him, if you're going to conquer Persia, you have to unravel the knot. Okay, if you're going to take your place in the world, you have to unravel the knot. He said, rubbish. Took his sword out, cut right through it. Bang! It's gone. Where's your knot? Same as Zen. Don't polish the mirror, smash the bloody mirror. Those thoughts will constantly hold you back. You don't need them. You were there before you had them. You'll be there after they've gone. All the thoughts are wrong. You don't need them. At least try it. Try not thinking for a while. Get out of your head. Stop thinking. Just be.
The unravelling, Alan, in the yogic practice, of course. I remember you and V writing a card to us about tying people in knots to set them free. Do you remember that when we opened Faith House about 30 odd years ago? And the actual physical practice will bring out of the deep depths of some subconscious lots of imagery.
Yes.
Which Eugene always said, and I always pass that information on, don't attach yourself to it, because otherwise people start thinking they're the king of Siam or whatever. But it's the watching process, it's this going back into the field and being the watcher. But the practice itself, anything that we do, whether it's art, music, whatever we focus on, can start to let this, it's a natural process, a slow process, a kindly process, in fact, of release happen.
Absolutely. And what's coming through is anything which bends those things will loosen them and free you. So anything creative is to bring in from, This field is infinitely creative, it's constantly pushing ideas, never the same one twice, but it can't get through to this citadel which is being created essentially to keep those ideas out.
That's your question. Does defining your terms loosen or bind?
If you can define your terms, you understand that the very language structure is logical. So language ultimately comes from here. It's a logical structure, and it's, again, balanced so that this higgledy-piggledy thing here has taken things out of sequence. It's tied things together which don't necessarily follow. It said, this is the way to see the world, and it's hammered it home. Now, there might be millions of ways of linking those two things together. You've only got one. I remember working with a girl once who was actually very, very chewed up, and I was seeing her in Rain Hill. And she said, she'd gone to university and she'd gone peculiar in the first year, within about the first 2 months. And she said, I always remember my father saying to me, you've passed all your A-levels now, you can do anything you want to. You can be a doctor or a lawyer. You know? You've jumped through the hoops, you've got as far as you can be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if she wanted to join the circus?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, she might have wanted, I got what she wanted to do. Fixed. There's a fixed thing for you. Now if you swallow that, you've got all this energy here, which I don't want to be this, you know. And maybe it could hit you within 3 months, as it did with her, or 40 years down the line, she could say, I don't want to be a bloody doctor, you know. That's why they go crazy. Every now and again, whatever you're doing, somebody can go crazy, absolutely nutcases. You know? Now, the old Roman idea was you have a Saturnalia. Saturn is the god that pushes you into situations. Society has a Saturn function, compresses you. Saturday night, Saturnalia. All the energy is here. The fixed nature of that prism is released on Saturday night. Still happens, you know. Tomorrow night, go down into darkest Heswall and see them releasing Saturn. Okay? Bacchus, the god of wine, releases the energy. It allows free spirit reign for a while. Some people literally need that. It's called spirit because it releases spirits. Spirits do that. So that's one way of breaking them down. Or drugs, you can do it. There are guys who spin and spin and spin until this stops working. You know? I remember I used to work with a guy in the theatre, and on a Friday night when we got paid, he used to say, I've got to kill some brain cells tonight. I've got to kill some brain cells tonight. And he did. He used to spend, he said, it's about £70, you know. First of all, there was the cocaine to get him high, and then there was the alcohol, the whiskey, to knock the edge off the cocaine, to slow it right down. He said, I'll be okay by Monday. And he wasn't. I mean, obviously, because I was there on a Monday to see him come in. But the damage he was doing to himself, and this is not one or two, this is most of our society has some sort of a leakage point, some sort of painkiller, or...
But do you
Is that an attempt?
Sorry.
No, you go.
Do you think that maybe there is some kind of instinct that if I kill off enough brain cells, I will lose some of that information that's been put in?
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
done automatically rather than deliberately by people who do get addicted to
Well, you feel yourself literally switching off. You're going underneath the level of conscious thought. You're not going above it. So you're not getting back into that free spiritual level as you should be. What you're actually doing is beating up these processes here so that they don't work anymore. In fact, if you do it, I mean, there are lots of guys who do it deliberately, you know, and a good cocktail steward will be able to mix up you a few things which will take you out pretty quickly, you know.
But do you think intuitively people think that maybe they will release themselves from all that garbage,
Yes.
but it doesn't actually work?
Well, it doesn't work because it doesn't
It doesn't
there's
kill
no
the right
sense in
brain
it,
cells.
yeah. That's right. But they do instinctively know that they've got to get out of
Remove
themselves.
something.
There are
yes.
musicians, there are lots of musicians who can't play without drugs.
Yeah.
You know, they think that they can't be creative unless they take something to stop that thing working inside themselves.
What about somebody like Ram Dass, who years ago decided to experiment, an intelligent man, and decided to experiment, and found, took him to a place where he was able to look logically at things, because of his professional life, at things he was only able to access through drugs, and then he didn't continue them, or did he?
Well,
I don't know.
he continued them for a pretty long time, and he was taking a very, very powerful drug, wasn't he?
I don't know.
LSD.
LSD.
Yeah. So he was taking something which was really powerful.
He gave his guru, he went to India and he met up with the guru, and he gave his guru 5 times the dose that he would normally take, and guru sat down for meditation, and about 3 hours later he just looked at him and said, "It's good, but not as good as meditation." So it didn't affect him because obviously he's at that level.
But these processes are all ways of doing that, and but you see, if you look out in society, you see a lot of people are struggling with that. You think of the amount of Valium that's taken. What's the other one? Prozac, yeah. And alcohol. You know, these things are. You know, I was talking to a guy who said, inside prisons would not function if it wasn't for them allowing the drugs in. We've got to allow the drugs in, because otherwise the thing would explode. You know, you've got people, horrendous situations of that, whose parents definitely didn't have their best interests in heart. How on earth are they going to struggle against that? Well, any way they can.
Can I ask, Alan, I mean, are we talking about trying to step outside this inner circle into this outer circle, which is, if you like, the organismic self, for want of a better term? So you are actually experiencing the person that you are meant to be, but because of your upbringing and things that have been imposed on you by society, by friends, by family, you are now locked in this inner circle with these, like you say, you talk about these processes. So is it taking drugs and getting smashed up your face on a Friday night? Is an attempt, although it doesn't happen, to step outside this circle?
Yeah, it does for a while. That's
Yeah.
why it works, and that's why people do it. It
And
isn't
it's
totally
not
unsuccessful.
Oh, yes.
What yoga is saying is there is a way of linking yourself to that which is permanent. Temporary at first, called Satori, where you get glimpses of a deeper level of yourself, which you realize was there all the time. It's called enlightenment because it's an awakening. You're not adding anything to it. You've not got to find something that isn't already there. It was there in the first place. You've got to scrub this thing out or not listen to it. That's why meditation is so difficult. To get into that state, you have to stop listening to that, or stop thinking that that's you. There is another you which doesn't speak and doesn't talk and isn't pictures, which is much deeper, and you know it. It's been there all the time, but you've overlaid it. So the process is tricky, not impossible, and some people will find that life itself will somehow take them into a situation where they haven't got any conceptualization. You will suddenly go into somewhere and it's so unexpected that it blows your mind literally. And then what happens is this thing sort of grows and tries to accumulate it and say, no, it's actually one of these. And if you're not careful, you'll go back into it. So there are places in the world which will also resonate with you and blow your mind. There's all sorts of things which will take you out of that on a temporary basis. Bereavement, I think, is a big one for most people. Bereavement hits them so hard. This cannot contemplate it. Anything which is bigger, or, Newton used to say, or is a good one, or is the sound you make when you've swallowed something that's too big to digest. oh, and he used to say, you know, it's that big, and this thing it cannot deal with it. So the Victorians used to paint these wonderful pictures of vast landscapes and sunsets and things, and you look at it and you haven't got a concept big enough, and for a few seconds you just step out of yourself. Or you'll see something, you'll find something that is really beautiful, and you've no concept. There's nothing, you know, this is what it's, what is it, I don't know, it's a pork chop or something. It shouldn't be beautiful, but my God, it is. And it's like Van Gogh in the chair, you know, that wonderful painting of the chair. It shimmers. It's an old chair. It shimmers with beauty. He's painted it. He spent 2 or 3 days hammering away at that thing. It resonates so violent, so, you know, it's so energetic. Wow. He's sitting there thinking, it's a damn chair. You know, no wonder he's in an asylum. He keeps saying to people, just look at the chair. It's drugs. It's LSD. Look at the chair.
An interesting world of what I call dream bodies.
Yes.
You have a dream body, and when you're observing the dream body or the dream bodies, you meet characters, you observe them. When you're looking at that level of consciousness, you see guys with unique characteristics. You think, I've never seen him before. Okay, give me the tablets and I'll be all right. But I always find this quite an interesting area. But beyond the dream bodies, there seems to be a world of symbology, like serpents and like the Kundalini serpent. When you look at the energies moving along the spine, there's a whole subconscious area which seems to link us all, sort of symbolic level. But I'm always curious about these, and these dream impressions are there all the time. Even when we're busy during the day, you can suddenly look inside yourself, and they're still going on.
Yep.
If you identify with them, they take you away in the right coach.
Yes. Well, people like Jung would say, okay, so these are the ones that you've got channeled into you. The ones that are really fascinating are these subconscious and unconscious ones, which, because these are so overlaid, these ones here will balance them perfectly. So what you find is your dream world, or your unconscious, which will balance those formalized ones that you've been stressed. The unstressed ones are here. And the big ones are called a shadow, because that one's taking all the light. There's a shadow here, which you think is really antisocial. And that shadow part of you resonates. It's the equal and opposite of that one. It's the dark side of the moon to this one. If you can literally begin to encompass your shadow, Jung says, you then start to become more eternal. You know, you then start to be more complete. I still say, get off into that. That is the same as that. It's the field which is still there. You can do that if you want to, but that's another lifetime of analysis at £150 a pop. You know, even the books, his books cost about £80 if you get the private ones that he produced, the Red Book, etc.
Alan, there's a book that's just come out called Tools. It's called Tools, and it's by 2 American guys, and he talks about this shadow. He gives 6 different ways of dealing practically with rubbish in our heads.
Yep.
And one of them is a way of getting this shadow on your side, so it's working with you, rather than trying to hide it and get rid of it. But it's very simplified the way it's written, so it's not a long book, it's only got about 6 chapters, but it's very, very useful in a practical way.
Yeah.
Because I've done a lot of work with Vida, but it just pinpoints certain common themes that run through a lot of people, and it picks them up and it deals with those. And it is a very useful, not an expensive book, but a very useful book for just the basic concepts of problems that
I've not read
a
it.
lot of people
It sounds
have.
good.
It is a very useful book, yeah.
What you'd find is, of course, they're writing the book about their particular problems. They're bound to. They have to. And for yours, you'd have to write. You'd have to do your own sort of thing, and that
Yes,
can take.
I think the good thing about it is it teaches you how to think in a different way, so that you can break your own problems down.
Yeah.
And I think one of the keys to the whole book is this shadow part of
Yeah.
it.
Well, that's Jung's.
Yes,
concept.
he does mention it
Yeah.
in it.
So why not a two-pronged attack then, where you're balancing this, but you're also trying to get into that thing, which is always there and always will be there, and is the one thing that's going to save you or solve you, dissolve you, literally. That needs to be dissolved. It needs to be literally washed away. And that solution to your problems is washing away all of those. Now, dealing with the shadow will help you. Dealing with all the opposites of those things will help you to balance them out. You know?
Well, yeah, because I think what they were saying was that they had to find some way of these people who were banging their heads against a brick wall because they tried all sorts of different things and they had no tools, literally, to get onto the first step of the ladder.
Yeah.
So obviously they tried all sorts of different things, and including expensive psychologists and psychiatrists and all the rest of it. But he kind of turned it all on its head, and he said, you know, start here. And then, having read the book, I can see that there is no reason why, having got on that first step of the ladder, then you can move forward in that direction. But it was specifically addressed at these people who just could not get on the first step of the ladder.
Well, you'd have to say there's an awful lot of people who don't even know that that is a trap. They think that's them.
That's right, yeah.
And that's the terrible situation, because you can't, you know that this person, you can sometimes, you know, you can sit alongside them on the bus and they're vibrating like hell, and you think to myself, oh my God. But it's so intense that they will probably never in this life get out of it. I mean, Eugene once said to me, he said there's something like about 99.9% of people are trapped in some level of that. And it's level, don't forget. It took a long time going in, it takes a long time coming out. Now, if that was a conservative sort of estimate, he said, that's, you'd have to say that most of us will be doing very well to get outside of that. People like Jung, for instance, wonderful character, imaginative life and a very creative life. But did he actually achieve that? You have to make your own mind up, and it's like Krishna saying to Arjuna, I tell you literally the way the world seems to work. You choose how you're going to respond. Yes, you can do that, and it's a very good method for loosening the whole process, for literally shaking the cage, but it's still a cage. And I tend to think, if you read the books, that Jung was still in the cage, you know? So, certainly Freud was definitely still in the cage. So, if you're going to listen to these guys, you can't go all the way, because they didn't. The guys who go all the way say that this is the way to do it, so why not do both? Because you can loosen the cage, and you can try and slip between the bars, I would suggest.
Into the glistening ether.
Into the glistening ether. I'm just going to look at the clock. Right. 10:15, so we're doing okay. Any thoughts, any further thoughts about this?
Oh, Eugene said, talking about rebirth, and he said he saw the opportunity to people. He saw the opportunity for rebirth, and he said he seized the opportunity and formed his own placenta.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it.
I'm just putting the website down because we're mentioning this guy, and he's freely accessible. All his talks that we know of are up on the web. Eugene Halliday. We're not selling it to you because he's free.com, and you'll find there a great host of tapes which you can listen to at your computer, or you can download them onto your iPod if you want to, and they're free. And it's pretty good. And the talks you've got here are companies plucked obviously from various ones. He doesn't talk directly about the Bhagavad Gita, but he mentions it in passing in several lectures. He's worth tuning into, yeah. And he was all about working with that, but also getting into the space, believing in that space all the time, and recognizing it's in you. It's there. You don't have to buy it off anyone. The things you buy will only help you to see it, but it's already there, and you've got it. And when you get into it, you'll recognize it. So enlightenment is an awakening of something which is already there. It's not gaining something that had to be welded on or stuck on or glued on.
I'm looking for myself. Have you seen me anywhere? You know, it's one of those, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't the secret really just watching in every moment, just being the observer and not being caught by conditioning? Just go. Isn't it a Buddhist? I'm not a Buddhist, but isn't it Buddhist thing to go and to let go and let that? And it's not that. 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 It's not that.
But isn't